Hello, Feisty friends. Sarah Gross here. It has been a wild few months over here at Feisty Media, and we are moving faster than ever to cover more women's sports, talk about more hot topics in sports and health, and bring the latest science to you, our Feisty listeners. I hope you all enjoyed the mini-series on coaching youth athletes that Jill Colangelo produced right here on the Women's Performance feed. If you haven't listened to that, and especially if you have a daughter or coach youth sports, definitely go back and have a listen. But for today, I'm very pleased to bring you this incredible podcast recording when I was in Austin for the South by Southwest conference in early March. This recording was done with Trey Holder, who is a partner and president at Brand Innovators for the Think Tank podcast with Essentially Sports. I just rewatched the video to remind myself of our conversation, and we really did cover a lot of ground. We talked about the recent rise of the women's sports movement, the marketing and media wheel that is making it grow, as well as our own experiences of being girls and women in sports before we had pro women's leagues. Feels like the beginning of time. Trey's co-host is Angela Gorin, who was a Canadian national team cyclist and recently broke the 1-hour world record on the track. We are also joined by Naomi Clarkson, who is the Senior VP of Marketing at Momentous. If you're someone who is curious about how and why everything is changing so quickly in the women's sports landscape, this podcast is definitely for you. We bring our perspectives on leadership, mentorship, media, sponsorship, and more. And if you would rather watch than listen, head over to Brand Innovators' YouTube channel or LinkedIn page. We will share that link in the show notes. Oh, and before we get into that conversation, starting next week right here on the Women's Performance podcast feed, we will be delivering a series of podcasts on aging and brain health, hosted by our own favorite Feisty psychologist, Dr. Erin Ayala. Erin interviews doctors and neuroscientists about all things brain health, from managing stress to reducing our chances of suffering from dementia to learning about neurodivergence as an adult. I've heard a couple of the interviews, and I think they're some of the best that we've had on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe right here on the Women's Performance podcast feed. Leave a 5-star review or a 4-star or 3-star, any review that is honest. Thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Essentially Sports Think Tank. I'm your host, Trey Holder. We have a really special episode today. I've got my co-host today, Angela Gorin, who was on the Canadian national team and I think owns the elite cycling record and is a serial entrepreneur, started Athletica Rewards, and really excited to hear about the Power Hour. I know you'll share that. And we have all these ladies in the room at South by Southwest. It was International Women's Day on Saturday. And the entire month here. So excited to have everybody on here. You'll have to excuse my voice. It's been 4 days at South by. I've got the bling to prove it. But excited for everybody to be on.
Perfect. That's a great intro. And oh my gosh, you took the bling off. I didn't take the bling off. But hi, everybody. Welcome to South by. Angela Gorin. Such a great pleasure. I've got two incredible guests that have joined today. Thanks to Trey having the invite with Essentially Sports hosting us. I've got to the far right in the poppy pink, we've got Sarah Gross, the CEO and founder of Feisty Media. But more than that, just taking into respect women in sports and leadership. She is also a 2-time Ironman champion. And then to my right in this beautiful white, we've got the SVP of Momentous, Naomi Clarkson. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is really special, Trey, to have the fact that you just mentioned it is International Women's Month. It was International Women's Day on Saturday, March the 8th. Having two incredible leaders in the room like Sarah and Naomi to share some of their stories, their backgrounds. So why don't we start with that? Sarah, why don't you take us off and kick us off here today with sharing a little bit about yourself, where you're from, all of the great things you've done in sport.
Okay. Thank you, Angela, for the intro. That's a lot to cover.
I know.
Tell us about yourself in 30 seconds.
Yeah, you've got 5 minutes.
Nobody wants 5 minutes of that.
I know, exactly.
Essentially, I'm Sarah Gross, founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I'm going to start now and then go backwards.
Perfect.
Right? So I've been running Feisty for 7.5 years, and we cover women's sports, women's health, and all kinds of topics. We have 5 podcasts. We also do educational programs and newsletters. So we've really been building even before the women's sports movement was on the insane trajectory it's on now. We were kind of working in that space. And where I came from, I was a professional Ironman athlete for 15 years. And at the end of my career, we did a big, I guess it would be advocacy/media push to get equal slots for the pro women at the Ironman World Championship, because we did not have that at that time. And we actually only got it 3 years ago. So it took us sort of 8 years of advocacy work, doing the work behind the scenes, talking to the right people, working with great people like Naomi and brands willing to support us, to actually get equal access to our world championship. And at that time when I was doing that work, I really saw the impact, I guess, of media, of having women telling their stories. We were interviewed by Forbes and Sports Illustrated and things outside of our usual triathlon media in our circles. And I saw, okay, that really helped put pressure and make change. So when I retired, I realized I wanted to do a media project, and then just started a podcast. You start with one and then you build that way. And prior to that, I was I did a PhD in women's history. And I studied ancient history and I read ancient texts. And for a long time, that PhD had nothing to do with what, with then becoming a pro athlete. And they were very disconnected parts of my life. But now with Feisty, I'm able to use a lot of the ways that we were thinking about history in terms of how do you ask questions about what women were doing in history and in ancient history and how do you get them into the pages of history books? Because if you ask different questions, you get different answers, right? And I think it's the same with sport. Mm-hmm. If you ask a question, when you're making a policy, for example, in sport, if you ask who does this policy serve most? As you're making the policy, you're quickly going to find out who's included and who's excluded. So there's a lot of ways that some of the methodological work that I did as a PhD student kind of apply now. So that's kind of my history. I was also, I think we'll talk about it later, I was also the child that was, basically heartbroken by the idea that the observation in the world that it was going to be really difficult for me to become a pro athlete if I wanted to as a woman, or become a leader of some kind. I really realized it's going to be hard to become Prime Minister of Canada because as a 7-year-old, that's what I want to do, because there's never been a woman in that position before. So that's all of that stuff really contributed to my.
I could see this being a 5-hour conversation or even more. Trey, are you ready? Just kidding. We're not going to keep you here for that long.
I'm ready to dive into ancient
I know.
history.
I know, exactly.
I'm a history buff. I was I'm pretty excited to know Sarah.
No, that's a fantastic entrance, and I think it gives a perspective, obviously, of who you are and your background and paints that picture. So that's a great start. Naomi, share a little bit about your background, exactly.
Yeah, okay, so I'll take lead from Sarah, I'll go backwards. Naomi Clarkson, currently SVP of Marketing at Momentous. I have either been there for 4 weeks again, or I've been there for 862 days. And I say that because I took a hiatus. I joined Momentous 7 years ago as employee number 10, helped build the company up from basically 0 to 1 stage of startup growth, where we went through an acquisition, and decided to take a hiatus where I went to be the head of global marketing at Wahoo. Wahoo is a sports technology company primarily in the cycling, triathlon, running space. And at that time, that was really exciting for me because I had never done hardware, software. I'd always been in CPG. I'd done nearly 10 years in CPG, mostly in sports nutrition. And so at that point, it was just a really cool transition to do something different. So previous to that, I had been at a company called Science and Sport. That's actually what moved me over to the US. I live in Lake Tahoe, but I'm originally from Scotland. And I moved over to Science Sport when they were looking to grow the business. They were at the time, and still are, one of the leading sports endurance nutrition companies out of Europe. So I had the opportunity to move over here, start the business from the ground up, which was just a phenomenal opportunity. Fell in love with California and then never left. And previous to that, I worked for the world's largest sports nutrition company called Glanbia Performance Nutrition. So Glanbia is the world's largest dairy company, about a $7 billion company. They own multiple big sports nutrition brands that you generally see in GNC. So brands like Optimum Nutrition, BSN, Isopure. So got to really experience the whole health and fitness world and some very interesting bodybuilding shows during my time there, which was a whole new world. We can get into that later if you would like to know more about that.
Fascinating.
But previous to that, I actually started out as a journalist. So I did my master's in journalism after doing an undergrad in politics. I worked for Sky News as a producer. And I was really more focused on like news and economics and political landscape. I had no desire to work in sport. I grew up as an athlete, not at the same level as Sarah or you, but played netball the whole way through university. I did taekwondo growing up. I danced growing up. I did athletics growing up. I mean, any sport I could do, I would do. And always had this huge passion. But for some reason, I really felt like sport wasn't a career. Like I really felt like I had to do something more serious and really prove myself in the world. And I think that was like an underlying theme for me of like, I felt like I had to prove my worth and do something that felt hard. And so journalism felt hard, going out to the front lines, reporting on the news. And when I went and worked at Sky, quite frankly, quite quickly, I realized it wasn't the career I wanted to pursue. I was surrounded in a newsroom by people who were extremely jaded by life, who had been doing the job for 20 years and were sort of hardened and had lost their passion, lost their energy. And I was like, I just don't want that to be me. And I actually got the opportunity to start working on London 2012 Olympics at the time. And as soon as I realized that I could do storytelling in relation to sport and what the capacity of working at a brand could do to like further storytelling, it just was this aha moment where I was like, why have I been fighting this for so long? Like, I want to do this. And that was really when I made my transition into sport, and I've never looked back.
That's awesome. That's a great story. I can relate definitely on your background with the politics and history going to school, and we didn't use what we did in school because I did politics at the same time, but never thought I would get into sports. And then ironically, the Vancouver 2010 Olympics, which is what got into the kind of space, was the same kind of thing that I followed. I was like, oh my gosh, you can look at politics, economics, and what you can do to work with companies and sponsorship that comes into a big play when you look at bigger events. So I think it's like, I think we should touch on, Trey, like what's important here is obviously celebrating Women's History Month here and what we're doing for women in business, and both of you being in that position from a leadership side. It'd be interesting to understand, because we come from that generation where, like both of you have said, you didn't think that there was going to be a career for you as a professional athlete, right? You said that, Sarah, you said that as well. And now we're seeing this incredible, and I know we talked about it yesterday getting prepped for this, right? Where we are seeing based on data that's come out from major reports showing, for those that go on to college, university, and to play professional like Div 1, Div 2 sports, 80% of those that are women go on to leadership roles as executives. Mm-hmm. We know on the high school point, I think, Sarah, you brought that up. How important is that, as leaders, and you're working and you think about sports sponsorship and branding, right? Keeping in theme with essentially sports and what we're talking about. The next generation coming in, is there a part of you both that you feel like you're compelled as like somebody to pass that message forward because of what you went through? Obviously, I feel you are, but it'd be nice to kind of be, what made you make that point? There's a little bit of a why in there, but I'd be curious to kind of hear the story, because you both have been different in your careers, but you're doing it definitely for a purpose. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what that purpose is.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would say, I don't want to interrupt on that, but I definitely would love to introduce you and your background to the audience, and you tell your story because you're a bit of a badass yourself. So everybody's awesome. I want to hear about your background as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, obviously, Angela Gorin, and I'm also from the west coast of Canada where Sarah is. So you can start to see a little bit of the relationship that paints the picture. All great brands. I am the founder of a company called Tap and Go Technologies, where we specialize in banking and payments. However, we're more on the marketplace loyalty side, and our first niche market fits exactly what we're talking about today. Athletic rewards, where we've got thousands of brands that relate to the niche market of sport and wellness. My why behind wanting to start something like that is to be able to really put money back into the small businesses that give back to a collective community. And we know as athletes that is a community right there where people are loyal. Sarah, you're a triathlete. You did a lot back in netball, right? We talked about field hockey. Families put a lot of money and time into their kids. So I wanted to make that more accessible and affordable. And I think that was, for me, it was a paved history. If I start, like, that's where I'm at today. But you go back in history, I started a social enterprise that went right across Canada in schools with a sock. And it was taking that simple purpose of something so easy, a brand that parents spend a lot of money on, sports underwear, socks, they all play in. You're wearing socks and cool shoes today. And I went and kind of thought, how can we give back to kids, right? And through sock sales, they actually gave that determination of like where the purpose that they would put the sock sales. And that's kind of what happened before I got into what I'm doing now, because I spent and lost a lot of money on trying to acquire customers, but on also just miscellaneous fees that banks were charging and payment processors. So you can kind of see the history of what got me into this and thinking there's thousands of other brands out there that are doing it. And then before that, obviously, university, thought I'd go into politics, thinking I could change the world, all those great things. And I realized that I like working with like grassroots and being more supportive. And that really paved into kind of being an athlete. So that's a little bit of the background there. But sport-wise, same thing, like represented Canada on 3 national teams, have a whole story around not making it to the Olympics. But out of that, I found cycling, and that has definitely been, for 12 years as a professional UCI cyclist, it's been fantastic to use the bike as an instrument, and that's what drives impact for me. And now I've been able to work with, whether it's the Pau Gasols to the family offices to major athletes across the world, to drive philanthropy into communities. And that's what I'm excited for with the Power Hour.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a little bit too. But it's interesting going back to the question that you asked. I mean, it's very clear the three of y'all are a microcosm of athletes that move on to become major leaders, in their community. And you can, it's clearly you can see the discipline, the tenacity. If you know Angela, she's the Energizer Bunny, right? So it's just constantly pushing forward. So, but to get back to the original question you had, what are y'all doing to kind of give back and to mentor in the community?
I think what's interesting, so I've been on the advisory board and I mentor in a number of different programs that all help women in leadership. So one of them was called Women in Sports and Women in Sports Technology. Unfortunately, that program doesn't exist anymore because of funding, right? But that's like a whole other part of that story. And within Women in Sports Tech, I used to constantly meet mentees who would ask me, this program is so amazing. Did you have support like this when you were growing up? And the truth is no. As I was growing up, most of my mentors and people that I leaned into were men. It was men in business. So I mimicked a lot of that behavior. I felt very masculine in my leadership approach when I was younger because that's what I saw. And I thought that I had to be that to be successful. And I think similarly, like none of my sporting heroes growing up were women. And I hate saying that, right? But all my sporting heroes growing up were male athletes. I followed soccer, football, very, very heavily from a very young age. We had season tickets to my local club and we would go every week. My granddad was a huge supporter and would take me, and I was obsessed with football. But every football player I had on my wall was a man. And I idolized these guys because it just didn't exist. And even trying to play football in a country that was, the birthplace of football was so difficult as a female. Like it wasn't a thing. Like you either had to play netball or field hockey. And I think honestly now, like seeing how far sports have come and seeing the change in the amount of female leadership and the amount of mentorship that now exists is honestly sometimes still quite overwhelming. Like it's amazing compared to where I started when I was younger. And I think that if that had existed, I do always wonder, I'm like, well, how much further could I have gone in sport? How much faster could I have got there in business if those things had existed? But there was the women that I did encounter within leadership, I think then had a hardened attitude towards like, this was so hard for me, so it's going to be hard for you because you've got to prove yourself if you want to work in this. And I think that is something that I have really tried to take into my leadership and mentorship with any woman who seeks it, is I don't want it to be hard for the next generation. I want you to work for it and want it, but like I want it to be easier for you because I want to use the things that frankly benefited men for such a long period of time when there wasn't as many women in sport or leadership, that were networks, knowledge, and like ultimately just support, right? And I think those things now are really in abundance in comparison to what they were. And that's just ultimately what I try and give back, is like, how do I make it easier for the next generation? And how do I hopefully, be an inspiration to like how you can chart a path or chart a career, regardless of where you come from, circumstances, etc.
Nice.
Yeah. Like even the fact that I can have peers like Naomi and Angela, like sitting here, when Angela and I, we've known each other for years, but when I first talked to her, your vision around what you were creating with your tech products is just always it's always next level for me. So I'm like, okay, if I need to talk to someone who has a big, crazy vision, because for me, like building a media company also felt like a big, crazy vision. Like I like to talk to you, and then having like marketing people in women in high up marketing positions like that, definitely, I saw that coming through as I've been building the media company. Like the first people that sponsored our podcast were when we had women who were in marketing positions high up who actually listened to our podcast because they were saying, oh, well, this is the only podcast in triathlon or in cycling or whatever for women, or in the menopause space. And how can I sponsor you? Right. So it's really been this sort of sideways, almost like mentorship and peer relationships that have really, buoyed me in my journey. But yeah, to the point about like, for me, I was definitely like a brokenhearted child that really saw myself as a kid as like someone who was very capable, like I'm doing sport, before we hit puberty, like I'm out there beating the boys, all the time. And I was getting great grades, and I couldn't figure out like why there was this disparity in the world that I was observing. So now I really, especially with a media project, I really believe that it's like a see it, be it approach. And we've talked a lot, especially, with like lean in with the old types of ways of thinking about how we get women into more leadership positions. Like it's not just up to women ourselves to like break in and break new ground, but also we need to change the cultural environment that we're working in to actually be more, would you say like more supportive of women, of our ways of leading, and I see that happening now. So that for me is why I wanted to create a media project, because it's like, how do we reach people? How do we actually change culture or help navigate like a new culture where women's sports feels like it belongs and women leaders feel like they belong? So that's my way of, you asked about mentorship, Trey, like that's my way of mentoring, I suppose, the next generation, is providing all of this content where girls and young women can see we can do it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's amazing. I have two daughters. One is 21. The other's 17. They're both in business school. Mm-hmm. And it's been really interesting to see how empowered they are. Mm-hmm. They're very confident. They believe it's their world. They're not worried about, not being able to go out and control business. Somebody said something to my oldest daughter, like, well, I hope your husband's going to make a lot of money because you have, what did she say? You have, because you have a big taste or something. She goes, I'm the one that's going to make the money,
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And so I was like super proud of her, excited about her. So I'm going to have to introduce them to y'all.
Yeah.
She actually, I told you about Marie Schwartz at Tech TO in Toronto. I had her. She used to run a company called Sampler. Unfortunately, it didn't make it, but she's an amazing entrepreneur. So I had Kyla go and work for her in Toronto, because I think Toronto is such an amazing, diversity pool, and it just feels like there's a lot of empowerment there in general. She came back wanting to move to Toronto, by the way, so it fell in love with the food and everything else. So she'd be a good asset to Canada for sure. So Sarah, going back into the media stuff and focused on women's sports and media, clearly there has been a huge rise, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, I was just over at our Brand Innovators event at Lambert's here at South by, and I was talking to another media company. We were talking about women's basketball right now in college. Mm-hmm. And there's way more stars in the women's game than there are in the men's game. In fact, I can name, 10 female basketball players. I might be able to name like 2. And one of them just because I'm a Longhorn and I know he plays there. Mm-hmm. So, I'm curious when you see, I know in, there's 3 now professional volleyball leagues. Mm-hmm. There's a women's gymnastics league. There's track and field coming up. So I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about your perspective of these new leagues that are sprouting, and what are the ones that you think are going to be the most successful?
Oh, what's going to be the most successful? Mm-hmm. That's a difficult question. I think, obviously we've seen like the basketball leagues just the last couple of years just flying, right? What do I think is going to be most successful? It's very curious. I think we have a opportunity now with women's sports growing so much to actually kind of be different than men's sports, right? So I don't think I have an answer to what might be most successful. Right now we're seeing basketball and soccer in that space and hockey sort of close behind. But I think we are going to see other opportunities, like you mentioned volleyball, where you have like 90,000 people in Nebraska last year, I think, watching a volleyball game. It's like, who knew? And so I think we have an opportunity to actually have other types of women's sports rise up too. So I think anyone I think you mentioned track and field, like what they're doing with Athlos and the all women's event. So I think there's opportunities across the board, like to create like all women's sports events where maybe there weren't before, like in track and field. But I also think some smaller sports have some opportunities where the women might shine in a different way to the men. Because I come from a small sport, so I want to think this, but I think like triathlon, even we're seeing the rise right now. We went this morning to a hybrid high rocks. Is that like a high rocks training, and high rocks is just like going bananas now with the CrossFit community, the running community, all the endurance sport community. And I think that in some of those sports, we see the women and men from the beginning at the pro level, put an equal value on in terms of their sponsorships and how they're getting to these events and all of that. So I think, just there is endless opportunity, especially if you work in a niche sport right now, like the women's side. Yeah, there's endless opportunities to grow.
I'm definitely a huge volleyball fan. Both my daughters are near 6 foot, and they were volleyball players. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a high action sport. It's pretty fun to watch. I don't know, when you have 3, it'll be interesting to watch. 3 leagues will probably be difficult in any sport in any country, and so will they aggregate it? I think about like in the NFL years ago, you had the AFL and the NFL, and then they had to merge. So I'll be kind of curious to see what happens. I like what they're doing, locally here with like the Love Volleyball, because Love Volleyball is actually focusing on the athletes that played at the school as well. So there's 14 players on the team. 9 of them went to the University of Texas. And the University of Texas is a pretty power program. They won 2 of the last 3 national championships. So we worked a lot with Madison Skinner last year at Brand Innovators, and she's a bit of a star, and so she's on that team. But it's been really interesting. So Naomi, I'd love to get your perspective from a marketing perspective and your business and how you focus on marketing towards, athletes.
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's like in respect to like female athletes and the growth of that space, like I think people have to be investing now, right? Like, I mean, I think women's sport has proven that it is a business, right? Beyond just like being the right thing to do. And so one of the things that I really have made sure in the last few roles I've been in is that like we not only just do those things like as we feel like they're right, or like as we like an athlete, like we actually make a commitment to what is our sponsorship strategy within sport, right? Holistically. And that includes women's sports. Like if you look at the percentage of marketing dollars that still go towards women's specific sports sponsorship, it's still less than 10% of people's marketing budgets, right? And that's like outside of the leagues themselves. And like if you just think of the power of female athletes, like I think we were just hearing on Essentially Sports, Simone Biles is the #1 researched athlete, right? Yep. Across the entire website. Like that's amazing. Like, and so I think that now, like if 50% of your marketing budget isn't equally allocated towards the power of female athletes and the power of male athletes, like I think you're doing a disservice to your business. And so I think that needs to come from the top, from a leadership perspective. Like I think you got to set the strategy, set the commitment, and for people to understand like they have then the remit to allocate those dollars. But I think if you're not proactively thinking about your sponsorship approach from how do we make sure that we are providing visibility to what we know today is working, but what do we think the future of sport is, then you're just going to be left behind.
Do you spend a lot of time focusing on, do you work with any college athletes as well? Or, what is your entire plan when you build a plan around athlete marketing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that we're always looking at it from a couple of different perspectives, like who's the face that you want to have of your brand, right? Like the pro athlete that ultimately represents what's the personality of your brand. Then I think you're looking at like, well, who are the people that are actually in the action, right? And so that can be coaches, that can be current players at collegiate level. Like what are the other spaces you're involved in where you want to make sure that there's other athletes that are acting as those key brand ambassadors in those spaces. And then we always think about community too, like who are the people who are just influential beyond pro athlete, right? Who are the game changers on a day-to-day basis, like the CrossFit coach to the triathlon coach, right? Who can just be those people that are helping continuously put your brand out into the world in the way that you want it. And so I think you have to have a multi-layered strategy, like depending on what spaces you want to play in. I don't think it's one thing fits all. So I think we're constantly assessing that. I mean, for every business, it's different too, right? Like an interesting challenge, I think, in the running space is like, as we were launching into running at Wahoo, people just don't really respond to running professional athletes, right? But in the cycling space, if you're a cyclist, like you respond like heavily towards a professional cyclist in terms of level of influence. So I think there's also the business strategy has to like meet where that brand is at and where that sport's at. So yeah, I think it's different for every brand and like constantly assessing the spaces you want to play in.
Or is there, when you think about marketing, are there certain technology or platforms that you're really excited about today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the capability for like campaign marketing at an influencer level now is like really good. Like there's a couple of different platforms. Like there's one called Current that we're currently using. There's another one called Roster that we've used that really start to evaluate like what is the reach, what is the engagement of all of these different influencer networks you have. And you can start to attribute a media value, right? Because obviously one of the biggest challenges as a marketing leader in any business is the relationship with your CFO and often your CEO. Like less than 10% of CEOs come from a marketing background. Yeah. So you've always got to be the advocate within your own business of how do I make this a successful business model so my team and I continue to get the funds that we want to have to invest in the spaces we want to be in. And I think using tools like that to say, actually, like if we spend $1 million on Google, but we spend $1 million here, like what's the attributed media value? Like that's now so easy for marketers to do. And before that was hard to prove out that value. So I think the technology is just becoming better. But I do think data can be the death of good marketing too. So I think you have to understand like what you want to measure and like why it's important to your business, but understand that not everything is measurable. There's an art and a science to marketing. And I think it's super important that we don't lose the art because the art is often the special sauce of the business. And you've got to be comfortable with a certain percentage of your marketing budget being towards things that you just know are right. And that's why you got to have like right team, right leadership, because some of those things are just intangible.
So I think this is a great sideway in a conversation to bring back kind of like media and tools and resources, because I think we've come from all these different backgrounds when we didn't have access, especially Sarah, you and I, when we were racing. Like I did not post anything on Facebook or on Instagram because it didn't exist, right? Back in the early 2000s, it just wasn't even a thought. And even now, you know, here we are trying to post this morning and learn how to do selfies. It's like, which way do we do it? We're like laughing. Yeah, like literally.
I get scolded on that by myself.
I know, right? Exactly. It's like, what am I doing? How do I post this? Sarah's got TikTok down, which I'm impressed. So everybody's got to follow Feisty Media because she's got some great stories. And for sure, I'm pretty sure momentous. I'm going to have to start following a little bit more on what you guys are doing. But when it comes to the connection, I think, you know, looking at the athlete, like from a brand marketing perspective, because I've built a marketplace, which has taken that 5 years to do. One of the things that I look at, both combining media and marketplace, right? And marketing, how do you reach, is the resources and tools. When you think about your daughters, right? Anybody that's this name, image, likeness space that's massive in the US. Canada, we don't call it NIL or NIL. We could, but it's this ability that the next generation coming in that have the opportunity, whether it's female or male, but I'm excited obviously for the women, the girls, to be able to advance, is being able to come in and take a brand that they're super passionate and have purpose for, with who they are, and then be able to, through social media and through media platforms, understand where their strengths are and understanding, like, as you said, some things you can't measure, but it's, you know, I always we talked about the Haktua girl the other day, right? Like, oh my gosh, right? Like, not to drop anything like that, but I'm pretty sure people know who I'm talking about. Google if you didn't, right? But I think it's the same thing. Like some people just have what it takes. So when it comes to the marketing, the media play, from a cost advantage, and it's the affordability from a brand, because I got that a lot too when I started going out with Athletic Rewards, talking to brands, particularly on what's your marketing budget, what you spend. When I started to ask them, how much do you cost to acquire a customer? What's the lifetime value of that customer? All of a sudden it was like, oh, well, yeah, like we're spending 20 to 35% on that. No problem. Doesn't matter whether it's male or female. That's where we started to kind of look at, okay, well, what if we could put that money back into the business? So that's what Athletic Rewards does. But I think it's neat because then it brings it back to, well, we need to have athletes that are going to share their story, that are going to market those products and the brands. And we need to be able to show that. And that's what I think is interesting with the next generation coming in. They have that resource and the tool. So what, from a bullish stance, I'd love to understand, Sarah, from the media perspective, because you're working with athletes, right? You're working in a niche market of triathlon and running and gravel, which I'm excited for. Maybe not so much with Unbound coming up. And then from a perspective with a brand particularly directed at sport, what are you looking at for that next generation to come in when it comes to showcasing it? So people watching this can be like, oh, well, maybe if I'm an athlete, this is what this brand might be looking for and what I need to position myself. And what are some of the platforms in media? Like, what would a media company be looking for me to do?
Yeah.
Taking that kind of like opposite angle.
Yeah, I've been really surprised right from the beginning at how good, and with the stats play out on this, like how good some of the female athletes are at creating content, creating a brand, or creating influence, or even having a community. Like, so they're much better at creating super fandom in their own hometowns than, so like the first year when we covered the Ironman World Championship, we covered, all the previous champions. We did interviews with them all. The interview that went viral was an interview with a French woman who, and overnight, like back then we were posting the interviews on Facebook, right? Facebook video, and overnight we got like 16,000 views. We were brand new on this video, and it's because no one else interviewed her. Right. So, but she had this like super fandom in France. And then a lot of those people, then they saw our platform and it went from there. So I found that to be true a lot, is that like sometimes it's kind of unexpected. And sometimes some of the athletes have these super fan networks, at home or even in their home country that you don't even see or know about. So that's been definitely really cool to see. The other thing is to figure out, like when we're working with athletes or like people who contribute, say, to some of our stuff, like what is their, like you said, what is their strength, right? Like you don't have to be good at TikTok. Like I love TikTok. I mean, I'm not into it now, but during the pandemic, that was really fun for me. But like not everybody loves that, right? Some people can write. Some people are good on a podcast. Some people like just want a quick interview, and you got to work with people in different ways for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we work with, like I said, a lot of college athletes, and the parents will come to us, right, and they'll say, "Hey, how does my daughter or son, get these deals?" And that's one of the things we talk about also is authenticity, right? So it's super important that they're identifying something. They're not doing something for the short term. They're thinking long term about how this brand, really associates with me and what my goals are. And then it's about, practice. So if you're an athlete, it's the 10,000 hours, right? Steph Curry shoots 500 3-pointers every day. You got to practice what it is and become good at that craft as well. But the balance of making sure you don't sacrifice what's your main thing also, I think, is really important. And, I'm also curious, Sarah, when you are working with these athletes, I mean, athletes are really kind of becoming their brand themselves, right? And now they're not even, sometimes they don't even work with agents anymore, right? They kind of handle it all in-house and stuff. Are you seeing that happen a lot with athletes you're working with where, they're the brand?
Yeah, for sure. There was it's very cool right now in triathlon for an individual athlete to have a YouTube channel, right? But that's where we sort of define but not everybody should have a YouTube channel, right? But they're creating content themselves. Sometimes when they're good enough, they're hiring someone to do it for them. Definitely people are getting more savvy, and absolutely it's figuring out what your strengths are in that. Like you do not have to create video content just because someone at a social media conference said that video content's the next thing,
Yeah, I think Sarah's point nails it, to be honest. It's the authenticity play, right? I think as a brand, you have an identity from a brand perspective, you have values from a brand perspective, but sometimes depending on what your subject matter is, at Momentous, right? We want to be the authority in the space on supplements. We define ourselves as the supplement company, right? We are surrounded by experts and advisors, and we want to make sure that when you're coming to us, that we are the authority on sports nutrition. Whatever you're hearing from us is the best advice, the best information, the truest information that you can get. Therefore, within that, our own brand perception, it's kind of hard to often go into a personality perspective, right? That's maybe funny or maybe, some of these other traits, right? Without losing who you are at your core and how you want to be perceived by your consumer at a product engagement level. So athletes become so core because ultimately they become sort of the personality for your brand, right? And how you want to go away, and no one wants to hear us talk about ourselves constantly and all the time, but they want to hear about it through an authentic voice of someone else who represents that, what a Momentous customer looks like, what are they striving for. And we have this high achiever mindset. So I was on a call recently actually with a colleague, and she asked an athlete we were on the call with if they'd ever tried our products, and we were already signed with this athlete. And afterwards I had to like have a conversation and say, that's a question you never have to ask, because we will never work with an athlete unless they're truly already using our product or have tried our product or are highly engaged in our product. Like, and that has been consistent throughout my career. Like, I will not work with anyone who doesn't truly believe in what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of brands who will just look at a Simone Biles and say, I just want to work with her because she's Simone Biles. But, if Simone Biles didn't ever like our product, I would never work with her, because that's where the magic happens, and like the creation of content, the connection, like, and frankly, as a brand, how you get the best ROI. Because if you don't have that, they're not going to naturally integrate you, and you're not really going to get the value of your contract in a meaningful way. So I think that's super important.
Yeah. And just to add to that, like, we say no to, especially like, there's a lot of in nutrition supplement brands, like there's a lot of, I don't know what you'd say, because of the way it's regulated, there's a lot of brands that just aren't as good as others, right? So we say no to sponsorships all the time. Mm-hmm. We always try the products. I get the hosts of the podcast to try the products all the time, before. And then I have like a couple science people who are like, look at this product. Are the ingredients good? And we've said no to like some pretty big deals before because the product's not good, right? Yeah. So it's like on the other side, it works for us too. Because I also know we're not going to, if we bring on a sponsor and the product's not good and I know that our audience isn't going to like it, that's not going to last anyway. Like 3 months and they'll be gone. They won't get the ROI. So we, when we're working with the brand where the audience loves the product and we love the product, then it works. And then we have these partnerships that go 4, 5, 6 years. So it definitely works.
That's a good result there.
Hey, Feisty people. CEO Sarah Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Previnex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Previnex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Previnex.com. That's performance for 15% off at Previnex.com.
So how did y'all all get to know each other?
Okay, so well, this is really, I just met the amazing Naomi through Sarah. Obviously, as at the beginning of the conversation, Sarah and I go back. I grew up on Vancouver Island, same with Sarah, and I think we nailed it down to Simon Whitfield, former Olympic athlete, friends with Sarah as well. I think
Simon's he was an Olympic gold medalist.
Yeah. In triathlon. We should say the first gold medalist and the first one in triathlon in Sydney.
And he introduces me to many, many people. So I'm sure it went
Simon, we thank you because you are a connector. You've literally thrown way too many people my way and probably Sarah's too. But it's been a few years. We've been friends. When you think about leadership and you think about working as same thing like Trey, like how we met, right? The one thing I love about sports, and this is essentially sports, is how much a community we are. I think it doesn't matter. So that's the nice part. Like the minute when Simon picked up the phone and said, hey, like, you've got to meet Sarah, I didn't even question, well, who the heck is Sarah? What does she do? I was like, no, like, I'm going to meet her. And that's what happened. And she gave me the time of day. And I think it was probably, I would hope it was the same. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was like, who is this person? I don't really want to meet him.
No, I think you came over to our house with your mom. I think it was an immediate friendship.
I know. And then there was like automatically you lived in Dubai too. So there's a big story. I think there's all this neat collective around like where it comes from. And then same thing, Sarah's obviously working with incredible brands through Feisty Media and what she does. And she's known Naomi for quite some time, since Wahoo, I believe, right? And then now with obviously your movement where you're doing now. So it's a collective, and that's I'm grateful for all being in the same room having the conversation.
Yeah, we've only known each other for like 6 months, but it seems like forever.
I know, and it came through a direct connection. We met at Sport Beach, and then it moved into Ad Week in New York, I think, and that was
on the circuit here, or the circuit at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
So have you guys enjoyed your South by Southwest experience?
Yeah, it's my first time being here actually. So this was such a great excuse to come because I've always wanted to go. But then the pandemic happened and that was a whole, I don't know how many years went by in that amount of time anymore. But it's been amazing to come. The energy here is unbelievable, a little overwhelming. There's a lot going on. So I think you have to come with a plan. But I mean, I think connection and network is everything. I've always prioritized in my life, like trying to connect with other fellow like leaders in the space and learn. And I mean, that's one of my like core things that I just like constantly want to learn and be curious about how I can continue to get better. And I think opportunities like this just open that up in such a phenomenal way, to just be inspired and go back and have another perspective to be like, right, this is the next stuff we're going to do. This is the next frontier. So it gives me a lot of energy to be here.
We talked a little bit earlier about the Zoom culture, right? It's amazing to be at these places where you can have real human interaction. In fact, even doing this podcast, we used to do it virtually and now we do it in the studio, and it's just the rapport is better. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. And one of my friends' dads used to say, "You can't score if you're not around the ball." Right. So you got to get out there, you got to network, and then you always fall into these relationships that then become lifelong.
I've never been at a conference before where you don't actually have to attend the conference to meet and still meet hundreds of people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't go either.
Yeah. There's so many like sub conferences happening within the conference. It really is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, so Brand Innovators, I run the sports entertainment there, and we've done it for 13 years at Lambert's. And you guys got to stop by, a little bit yesterday. I've only been to South by one. I spoke at South by last year, and that's the only time I've ever been to the actual conference. But I've been going to this for 13 years. So, and Austin's a cool town. It's kind of a hometown for me. I'm a Texas Longhorn and live about an hour down the road. Have you been to Austin before? Has everybody been to Austin before? Yeah. So it's growing pretty rapidly. When I went to school here, I think it was like 350,000 people and maybe like 10 buildings. So I guess that also tells everybody how old I am, but it's been going pretty fast. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe Sarah, let's start with you. What is there anything you want to tell the audience about what's going on at Feisty or anything exciting that's coming up?
Yeah, so we just did our first funding round last year. Yay. We were bootstrapping until that point. Yeah. So I just sort of saw what was happening in the women's sports, women's health space and was like, we need to move more quickly. So we raised some money. Now we're putting together a new website and we're launching 3 new podcasts in the spring. So we've got a women's performance podcast, kind of like a little bit of a Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia type style podcast, but for more focused on women's issues or more bringing a female lens to the whole conversation of like performance health. We're relaunching our triathlon podcast and we're doing a women's sports podcast where we're getting in a bunch of experts in different sports to come and talk to us each week. So that's exciting. That's what's happening with Feisty. We also do a bunch of online education programs. So one of our biggest brands is actually a menopause brand. And when we launched it, I found out personally how little information women have about menopause. And then additionally, if you're an active woman and you've been active all your life, you have zero information because all the studies are done on a sedentary population, right? So really like the studies aren't even there. The doctors don't know. It was just a void of information. So we just started, interviewing our amazing host for that, Celine, started interviewing experts every week on different topics. And we've been going for 4 years. So that conversation is definitely continuing. Anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, education programs. So we run online courses and we have a bunch of education kind of products that people can like easily, once the website is launched, go and download and find. So really like the education, the intersection between women's sports and health education is really where we're landing in as our sweet spot.
So the education is focused on wellness and
yeah, but also that performance level of wellness, like not just like, yes, we need to be healthy, but also like, how do we be our best? How do we optimize? How do we live longer? How do we extend our health span? Those are the kind of questions we're asking, but with that female lens.
Amazing. And Naomi, maybe you could, any big stuff happening at Momentous you want to tell?
I feel like Sarah just teed me up perfectly for everything.
Boom.
Yeah, I was like, well, firstly, we'll be sponsoring everything that Sarah and Tia are doing because we highly believe in it. It actually does tie in perfectly with a core goal of ours this year. We're launching our women's line this year, and that's launching at the end of May. I can't really tell you too much more about exactly what's coming in the women's line, but like from an overarching perspective, like one of the things we really want to do is just shore up what is our responsibility as a supplement company in the space to close the gender gap in women's health and performance, because we have a direct role to play in that. I think between like up until 2020, only 6% of studies done in women's sports, like done in science and health, were done on women. And so all data that has ever been pulled to date within like supporting women's health has all been like come from studies that ultimately are looking at like men's physiology. And like that really got a big highlight back then. And there's a continued like push to how do we close that gender gap? And I truly believe like we work with so many universities, experts, advisors. We work with Dr. Stacey Sims. We work with Dr. Emily Krause. And like, you know, Dr. Stacey Sims, she has like her own funding program in women's health and research. So like we're going to be putting more money into that and supporting her. Dr. Emily Krause runs a FASTER program in women's health and research. We're going to be putting more money into that. So we're going to make a very firm commitment this year with an impact fund towards like how do we continue to like close that gender gap. Because not only is that the right thing to do, it's something that we have influence and responsibility to do within the category that we're in. We can't continue to put products on the market if we're not pulling authentically from data and science that represent women. So that I'm very excited about, core passion. And then beyond that, I mean, just our product innovation pipeline this year is phenomenal, and actually speaks really well too to like our core product philosophy is not just about like performance at the moment of sweat, but performance for life. And so we're really focused on like what you do today matters for tomorrow. And I think we're really trying to build a product line that really allows people to continue to do what they love doing for the rest of their lives, and not be, you know, plagued by illness, immunity issues or injury issues. And so the rest of our products that are launching this year are really all to support that ideology for performance for life. So I'm excited to bring that to life.
That's amazing. Well, we'll all have to figure out how to collaborate. I want to collaborate too. So we've got, you know, all these brand innovators. In fact, we did last year at Starbucks in New York at the Roastery, we did our first ever kind of cause marketing summit and trying to figure out how we can help make an impact and how let these marketers allow and share stuff. We do over 200 events a year. So I think we're going to do 6 to 8 of those this year. And, you know, could be an opportunity for everybody to participate. Well, Angela, we'll end with the Power Hour, which is something I know you're super.
I think you all teed me up.
Super excited about. See how this is all working out perfectly.
And it all gets us.
Take us home.
I'm going to take us home. I'm going to take us to that finish line. No, this is perfect. You all teed me up so nicely and talk about collaboration. So Impact Fund, Power Hour, going back to the story of all the whys. And I think we all have such drive and purpose and why here, no matter what we're doing in our personal lives, but also now our professional lives. So Power Hour is backed by the Power Play Impact Fund, which I founded. It's all about investing in physical, mental, nutritional, and financial wellness. And definitely would be love to learn more, Naomi, about what you guys are doing, because that could be a part of the funding and capital that's going to come in through that engine. But the Power Hour is the event that's going down in May, founded by a female.
Well, look at that.
I don't know. So yeah, so that being said, there could be a great stage. The Power Hour event, it's a great event. It's a Guinness World Record that's all about moving the world. So any of us can take part in it. Doesn't matter what age you are, where you are in the world, thanks to, you know, a link with Strava, Apple, you can get active. Everybody can go for a walk, do a class like yoga, or in my case, do an indoor cycling ride with a bunch of professional athletes live from Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, right? So I think what's going to be neat is, May 23rd, 24th. The 23rd is going to be a corporate wellness summit that's going down. So like you guys are doing with Starbucks in New York, there could be a great collaboration on that sense to look at wellness in a different angle with some great media companies and brands, I think. So that's really like the Power Hour is about moving the world to give back to kids and community initiatives that touch on those 4 pillars of wellness. It was an idea after breaking the Canadian elite record in the 1 hour and thinking, I'm too old to go on in professional sports anymore. Other people got to do a record with me. So that's how it came up. And I think that's a great way to kind of finish on the collection of like how we work and collaborate as a community and how we can drive, especially more women and girls being that we're in March
I think
forward.
you were originally going to do it during South by, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
This would have never happened.
It was going to be on March 8th. It was. You were totally right. And it was going to be, we were trying to figure out how you were going to fly out on a plane on the Saturday. And then it's worked out really nicely looking at Memorial Day because I think the weather's going to be a lot better for people across, especially North America, but global even as well, as we start to look at our partnerships with like Snap Fitness that has like 3,000 chains around the world. And we're off to the same, I think, venue as well this week with the Health Fitness Association show, formerly URSA in Vegas. So yeah, it's going to be exciting times.
Well, this has been an awesome show. This is actually the biggest think tank we've had. I think I was telling y'all yesterday, a think tank should be a lot of people. So y'all are the inaugural one with tons of people on it. So it's been a thrill to have everybody on here. Y'all all amazing human beings, and everything you're doing is inspirational. And really excited to figure out how we can all collaborate together. And hopefully you guys continue to join Austin for a couple days and continue to network.
Thanks for having
so much,
us.
Jay.
Absolutely.